Hello and welcome. I'm Liz Booker, and I'm so excited to be talking to the author of one of two books that we're discussing in the Aviatrix book club this month. Pat Valdata, welcome.
Thank you, Liz. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you for having me.
No reason to stay on ground. Lift your hands and you can touch and fly.
I am so excited to talk to you, even though I just got to talk to you last night in the Aviatrix book club discussion. And thank you so much for showing up to that. We look forward to seeing you in the next discussion. So, as I mentioned, this is one of two books that we are discussing. It's called Crosswind, a novel. Can you give us a synopsis and maybe do a little reading?
Sure, I'd be happy to. This is a book about a young woman who unfortunately has to leave college because of a couple of weird accidents that take the lives of her parents, and she finds herself kind of drifting for a little while until she sees a glider and goes for a glider ride and finds that she has a new family among the people at the glider port. And so I follow her progress and also that of her instructor, who's an older woman who has a few issues of her own. And together, the two of them help each other through this period in their lives.
Yeah, that's great. And did you have a reading that you wanted to share?
Sure. Let me just give you a taste of what Ellen's first flight was like in the glider when she went there. And this is right as they're taking off. Her instructor's name is Andrea, but they call her Andy. We bumped along the ground just as Andy had said we would, as the glider righted itself and picked up speed. Then suddenly everything was smooth. We're flying, she told me. The tow plane was still rolling on the ground ahead of us. Then it lifted off and began to climb. I could see the trees moving past us on either side, but the grass was just a blur of green. Then it was gone, just like that. Magic. A whole valley lay below me, spread out far below. I could see small farmhouses, barns, fields, toy-sized cows and horses. A road was a slim gray ribbon with a matchbox car moving slowly along it. We passed over the car and then it was out of sight, somewhere behind me. Andy was talking. I just realized that she had been describing the scenery, but I hadn't heard a word. I'm sorry, what did you say? I asked. I said taking off from here is almost like launching from an aircraft carrier. The runway ends at a cliff, and the ground drops straight down more than 400 feet. She had to shout a little for me to hear her. It'll be quieter after we release. The tow plane is pretty noisy. I kept gawking out the window, looking right and left. I could look straight below to watch the ground moving underneath us, or ahead at the tow plane, which bobbed up and down in front of us. We bobbed too, and I gave the shoulder straps an extra tug. They had seemed tight enough on the ground. How are you doing? Andy shouted. Fine, I shouted back. Almost there. There's going to be a loud bang when we pull the release. Are you ready? Yes. Okay, pull the red knob. Me? Yes, you. Pull it now. I pulled, and sure enough, it sounded like a pistol shot. Then nothing but the soft murmur of the wind outside. Andy didn't say anything for a minute while I tried to take in the sudden deceleration, the silence. Then, in a quiet voice, she said, Lovely, isn't it? It's beautiful. We soared over countryside that looked like a postcard. The fields were small squares and rectangles, all shades of brown and green. Houses were smaller than doll houses. A herd of Angus was an ant colony. Above me, the white clouds hung in puffs with flat gray undersides. We were floating in the blue sky, floating in nothing, detached and silent in a strange craft that was narrower than an armchair.
Oh,
There you go.
so good, Pat. You capture that so well. Well, so as I mentioned, this is one of two books that we are discussing in the
Mhm.
book club. I paired it with another book about gliding, which is called Skybound, A Woman's Journey in Flight. And it is a memoir by Rebecca Loncraine, who is a Welsh woman who was a cancer survivor when she started gliding for the first time. And so that's something that I really liked in both of these books is that you introduced this character and she talking about her own experience are two women who have never experienced anything flying before. They haven't flown anything before and they're taking all of this in as a complete novice and recording sort of that experience of their first time gliding. And then her book goes, I really liked the way these two complement each other because hers is, her actual experience
Right.
of going pretty far. And as far as gliding is concerned,
Mhm.
actually flying in Wales for 3 seasons and not wanting to face a season of not gliding because this is what was really helping her heal from her
Right.
experience. So she goes to New Zealand and glides there for a season, and that's some very extreme gliding. And then
Hmm.
she does another little thing at the end in Nepal. Sadly, Rebecca is no longer with us. She ended up, the cancer came back after she had started actually a writing program to get this book done, and her family published it for her. So we're very grateful to be able to experience the joy that she felt in that process of trying to heal from that experience of cancer, but then also to experience healing through gliding through your fictional character. And I want to say the reason that I picked these books is because July 2nd is the first anniversary of my first glider flight. And so I
Yay.
came to gliding with a lot of other flying experience,
Hmm.
a very small amount of fixed wing, but I have my commercial fixed and rotary wing. Most of my time was rotary. And I don't do it very often. I have a good friend, shout out to my fellow retired Coast Guard helicopter pilot and instructor, Nelson Brandt, who is just like a little kid when we fly. He like
Hmm.
giggles and just shouts for joy, and I love being around that. And so I love going gliding with him. And so I have about 10.7 hours
Yay.
gliding
Congratulations.
so far in a year, which isn't much, but it's affordable. I love it. And I want to hear about your flying and gliding journey. Tell us about that.
Thank you. I know what you're talking about because that sense of joy that you feel and the fun of it is really important because gliding really is a very impractical sport. Although a glider makes a wonderful platform for scientific research, and there's a group of people called the Perland Project that are taking a glider down into the Andes to go into the extreme mountain wave that they have in the Andes. And they're flying at altitudes of 50, 60,000 feet in a glider, which is just amazing. But they've got a
Wow.
whole bunch of scientific instrumentation on board and they're doing all kinds of data collection. So they're not just having fun and doing very extreme flying, but they're also collecting a lot of data. So gliders have that one practical value, but for the most part, it is just the joy of aviation. And as
Mhm.
you mentioned, it's very affordable, and it's the only way I could have gotten into flying. It was extremely affordable for me. The people I went to, it was a commercial operation, and you could pre-buy time at a discount, which was wonderful. So that helped me get through all my hours. And I started out with gliders because I honestly didn't feel confident enough to fly airplanes, which is silly. But when you don't know anything about aviation and you've never had a role model or mentor in aviation, you don't know what you're capable of. And I soon found out that I was a pretty decent pilot. So I took flying lessons in powered aircraft after I got my glider license. So the power was my add on, not the other way around. And I got my single engine land and flew uh, in power aircraft for about 10 years. It was really wonderful when I lived in New Jersey. I was a member of the 99s and flew in a couple of their air rallies and really enjoyed it a lot. And then I got my commercial glider certificate, and then later I got my instructor. So I was a CFIG in
Wait,
gliders
how old
for,
were you when you started?
I was in my 20s when I started. It was a very long time ago.
I'm just thinking about, other people and when they start this
Yeah.
endeavor and how they get into it.
Well,
Well, that's amazing.
I had wanted to fly ever since I was a little kid. And I remember approaching my parents about joining the Civil Air Patrol. And I think the root reason we didn't do it is because we couldn't afford it. But, whatever it would cost to get into that and buy the uniform and all that. So they just said, girls don't
Uh,
do that.
oh.
And then when I was in high school, there was this article in the National Geographic about soaring, and they made it sound so amazing that it just clicked with me. And I said, I could do that. I could see
Oh, that's
myself
so
doing
great.
that. And again, I told my parents about it, and they said, girls don't do that.
Oh.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, I got that a lot. And
Oh.
so I had to wait until I was in my 20s before I was able to finally get in a glider.
Okay. Well, hopefully the parents today aren't doing that still.
Oh, I certainly hope not.
I hope not.
Yeah,
Yeah. I'm not convinced it's not happening, but I hope not.
yeah.
Well, so then you write this beautiful book. So how
Thank
did
you.
these things come together? Tell us about, the inception of the idea for this novel and
When I was 19, my father died while I was in college. And clearly that had a huge effect on me and my life. It changed the course of my life. I had to transfer to a school back home and just kind of start over, and everything was really difficult for a while. And I had that feeling of loss and not knowing what to do with myself, where my life was going to go. I literally could not picture myself as an adult and what I would possibly be doing. It just was, it just completely threw my trajectory off completely. And that sense of being adrift really stuck with me. And also, I wanted to do something with my dad's death because it was just so unexpected. He was only 51 years old, very unexpected, um, and very painful. And I wanted to be able to do something to kind of honor his life a little bit. So I made him the triggering character in my book. The first thing that happens is that he dies in the book, and I just wanted to write about that a little bit. And then the flying, just because it was what I was doing at the time, it just came into it. And so I thought, well, this is how Ellen's going to be able to get her life together. Mine didn't come out quite that way. I did other things to get my life together, but I thought this would be this is what I wish I could have done. Basically, if I had been her, this is what I wish could have happened to me. And so I just wrote her story, making her a much better pilot than I am, just to get her doing what I wish I could have done and what I would hope many other young women could do.
Well, I loved what you did with that story from a
Thanks.
craft perspective, and giving her sort of this emotional arc that does show how the experience, not just of the soaring. I mean, the soaring is really, gives her a lot of perspective, but
Right,
also the community that she's
right,
introduced to. So, like,
right.
let's talk a little bit about the setting. So, the book opens, she's at school or whatever, and gets called home to this small neighborhood. It's in Pennsylvania,
New Jersey.
or New Jersey, right,
Hmm.
close to Pennsylvania, New
Hmm.
Jersey. And it's a very colorful community of sort of middle European families,
Hmm.
immigrants. And last night we read a paragraph of that. Night we might do that when we get to the writing portion of this,
Hmm.
just because you do just a beautiful job of giving us setting description as its own character. So you bring us into this world of just it's a a colorful world in
Hmm.
terms of like the history and the families bringing
Yeah.
all of their foods and their cultures together in
Hmm.
this neighborhood. But it's also like presents a bleak future,
Hmm.
because everybody works for this one plant
Hmm.
that's in the neighborhood, and it's sort of like a dead end life. And that's what she has to look forward to.
Yeah.
And then she goes for a drive one weekend and she sees this glider. And so she's, introduced to this whole other community of people that welcomes her so warmly.
Hmm.
And you mentioned, I loved the fact that you had a female mentor in the
Yeah.
book for her, like an older woman who
Hmm.
was on her own journey of healing.
Right.
And I thought that she not only mentored your main character in terms of like learning how to glide, but
Hmm.
also kind of learning how to love.
Hmm.
Because that was one of the things that I thought was interesting with Helen, is that she had these parents, but she didn't really understand what their relationship was.
Yeah.
And so she didn't have like um, I don't think I didn't sense that she had a really strong example of what a loving relationship might look like. And then she gets that also with her mentor. So tell me about those things and the way that you incorporated those things.
Thanks. When I was growing up, people weren't very demonstrative. I
Mm,
didn't see parents of any parents hugging and kissing and just acting affectionate toward one another. Um, they were very practical. They were just focused on day-to-day life, and so you didn't see a whole lot of that. But when you're in your teens, you also don't see your parents as people either. So you don't
right.
really know that they experience life like you do and
Yeah.
just go through the same kinds of emotions and things that you do. So young people don't know that. So this book is really kind of a coming of age story because Ellen gets a little bit of understanding as she goes through all this. But I did want to write about that part of New Jersey. It's not a location most people write about. They're not ethnic groups most people write about. Um, so I wanted to do that, and so I created this fictional town that's based on my own hometown of New Brunswick, but I did fictionalize it. I changed the topography of it. I had to draw a map for myself so I would remember where everything is in relation to everything else. And that made it a whole lot of fun. And the glider scenes are really a composite of a whole bunch of airports that I've flown at. There isn't any one airport that really looks like Crosswind. I took little bits of Elmira and little bits of Van Sant and a little bit of Sky Manor, and just mushed them all together into this one new place of its own that's up on a hillside with the woods, and then that little drop off that they have, which Andy so exaggerates and says it's like going off a carrier. Clearly, she's never been off an aircraft carrier. She wouldn't say that. But that's the myth that they tell you when you fly off a cliffside glider port like that. Everybody explains it that way,
That's what
which
it's
is
like. Oh, okay.
yeah,
That's interesting.
that's what they say. Yeah,
That's
yeah.
funny. They both go through this journey of
Mhm,
healing, and it comes full circle in the end. And
mhm,
and you're right, as in terms of both coming of age, making decisions about what direction she wants to go in her life,
mhm,
and seeing more possibilities than what her small town has to offer her.
mhm,
That's kind of what gliding helps her do.
mhm.
So, why did you write the book, and who was your intended audience? Like, what do you hope it accomplishes?
Well, I wrote the book because I had enrolled in a Master of Fine Arts program, and you need to do a creative thesis in a program like that. So I needed to come up with a
Mhm.
book-length manuscript. And so that's the why I wrote a book. And obviously, I wrote it based a lot on my own experience in flying. So I wanted to do that because no one that I knew had really written a book about soaring before, not a
Yeah,
novel anyway.
yeah,
So I thought that I would do that. And the audience, it's really, I didn't think about that too much when I wrote it, but I've discovered that the audience is broader than I might think. I've had fan letters from male glider pilots who said how much they liked it. So even though it clearly has kind of a women's focus and kind of a young adult coming of age focus,
hmm,
it appeals to people of all ages. And
yeah,
pilots seem to really enjoy it because they know what it's like to experience this. And it's just been fun to have people from all different walks of life tell me how much they've enjoyed the book. So it really does have a broad appeal, which makes me really happy.
yeah, yeah. No, it's great. I agree. I think the genre didn't really exist even more than like 5 or 10 years ago, but there's this sort
Yeah.
of new adult, where they take
Hmm.
the age groups and kind of decide who the target reader
Right.
is. And I think
Hmm.
this is definitely a new adult book. But
Hmm.
again, if you're somebody who is healing from trauma,
Hmm.
or somebody who is interested in aviation or gliding,
Hmm.
or yeah, all of these things, and it's
Right.
just a great story. I loved it so much.
Thanks.
At the back of it, you in your author's note. So this book was published quite a while ago,
Yeah, it
and
was.
it has a lot of longevity, and still, I mean, it's definitely set in a time period that
Right.
is obviously not now, because we don't have cell phones and all of this stuff,
Right.
computer stuff.
Yeah.
It's
Still
very
still using paper charts.
exactly, paper charts and all that stuff,
Yeah.
but it's still so relevant otherwise. I
Yeah.
mean, and relatable otherwise.
Great. Thank you.
But in the back of the book, you talk about how you were a founding member of the Women's Soaring Association. Am I getting
Women
that right?
Soaring Pilots Association,
Yes, please tell us about that.
WSPA.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, in 1985, a group of us, well, I should back up. In the late 70s, the Soaring Society of America held a seminar just for women pilots. And it was held in Tehachapi, California. And I didn't hear about that in time, so I missed that one. But I went to the next one and the next one and the next one. And so after doing this for a few years in 1985, we got together and said, a common thread that happens at all of our seminars is we talk about how difficult it can be to be the only woman at your glider port and how hard it is to communicate. We had a newsletter called Hangar Soaring, which still exists, but that only came out, maybe 4 times a year. So it's really hard to kind of build a community of pilots when you're scattered across the country like this. And so we formed this organization to see what we could do about that. And we took over the running of that annual women's seminar, which still goes on every year, and just did some more things regionally, tried to get women together for smaller seminars, and just try to, with a website, and now we can communicate online, which is really, really helpful. We're able to broaden that out to many people. So we always wanted to be an international group. One of our first members was from Canada. So we've been international from the start, but now we also have members in Europe, which is really fun. And we would like to get more members from all around the world because soaring is a great sport and it is done all around the world. So the WSPA is still doing well and growing, and I'm so pleased to see that happen from a group of 6 of us meeting in a really rundown, dusty little house trailer in Nevada in the desert.
Well,
So it's
I'm definitely going to join. I'm excited about
good.
it. I was excited about to learn about it from you.
Thanks.
And in all, so you have been gliding. Are you still actively gliding now?
I'm not, unfortunately. I have some health issues, in
Yeah.
particular vertigo, that make it a little difficult to do
Oh,
flying. Yeah.
that stinks. Yeah.
I also have MS, and so I don't
Oh,
tolerate heat
okay.
well anymore. And of course,
Oh, yeah.
soaring is really a spring, summer, fall sport. So I don't do well being out in a hot glider port all day anymore. It just doesn't work for
Yeah.
me. And then we moved
Yeah.
to an area where there is no glider port. So I ended up, I was partners in a beautiful Pilatus B4 sailplane, until we moved and we sold it. And now I'm down here, but I live like a half mile off the runway of our local airport. And in fact, I can hear an airplane taking off now, which is really lovely. So I get to still feel aviation all the time
That's
and be
great.
around it. The
Yeah.
planes fly their downwind leg right past my house all the time, which I really enjoy. I'm not sure all my neighbors do, but I love it. So
That's
yeah, and I go to the women's seminars when I can.
okay. Well, that's cool. So you're still
Yeah,
out there mentoring us. That's
yeah.
wonderful. So in your years of gliding,
hmm
what do you have like a favorite moment or a most spectacular experience?
Oh gosh, there are so many. It would be really really hard to narrow it down. Obviously, your first solo, because it was my first solo of any kind of aircraft, was
Right.
was phenomenal. Didn't quite turn out the way I thought it would,
Hmm.
but it was a really interesting experience. And I tell people this so they can understand that you can make a mistake and still do okay. I think I got soloed a little bit too early because my instructor had never taught any women before. I don't think he realized that I needed, because I was such a total beginner.
Yeah.
I really needed a little more time than most. And
Yeah.
he did solo me on a day when the weather started to change. And unfortunately, a storm was starting to come in, so the air was shifting around. And I wasn't experienced enough to really notice and pay attention to that. So
Yeah.
everything was doing fine. Takeoff went great. My flying was fine. And I was in the pattern, and in a typical glider pattern, you fly across the runway, downwind, and then base and leg. So you do a rectangular flight around it. And I was on my downwind, and just you deploy your spoilers on downwind. So I thought, and I just put them out and left them out because up
Wow.
until then, it had worked fine. But the
Right.
air was changing and I was in a lot of sync. And I was so focused on landing that I didn't pay attention to how much sync I was in. And apparently, my instructor was on the ground just yelling, "Put the spoilers in, put the spoilers in." And of course, I couldn't hear him because we had no radios back then.
Yeah.
So I got to the end of my downwind and I looked to turn base and went, "I'm not going to make it back to the airport." But this was in the country, and there was this field right below me, right across the street from the airport. And I said, "All right, well, I'm going to land in the field." So my very first solo was also my very first outlanding away from the
Oh
airport.
my goodness.
Everything went fine. I actually did a perfectly fine landing. But because I wasn't prepared to do a cross country, no one had ever told me when you do a cross country flight and you land, you want to stop as soon as possible because you don't know what hazards are in the field ahead of you. And I
Right.
just let it roll, thinking I'll get as close to the airport as I can so they don't have to retrieve me so hard. And there was a little 2-inch wide sapling at the end, right at the edge of the road, and I clipped it with the right wing as I was stopping. And I put a little dent in the wing skin, which was a very easy repair. They didn't even charge me for it because it really wasn't a big deal. But I was furious at myself for not doing it well and got out of the glider, and I was just cursing up a blue streak because I was so mad at myself for dinging this little glider that I loved, and being an idiot and not thinking. And this poor man was driving down the road and he saw me crash and he got out of his car. He's like, "Are you okay?" And I'm just, every other word's a 4-letter word. And it was just hilarious that he just scurried back in his car and drove off. So,
The
I mean, it
crazy lady
was
with the plane.
crazy lady with a plane. Yeah. And I mean, everything was fine. I felt really bad about dinging the wing like that, but it was not a big deal at all. And I actually once I realized what was going on, I think I handled it okay, even though I shouldn't have gotten that position in the first place.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, so much going on there. I don't like God, that would have been really hard on the confidence for me anyway. At that
Yeah.
point, I think I would have been like, ah,
Well, I was a little,
man,
yeah, my instructor took me up for a few more flights before he let me go again. And then after that, it was fine. But, we did a lot more on flexibility, and you don't just lock the spoilers in and leave them there. They're there to take in, put out, whatever you have to do to get back. So I got a little bit better at my patterns after that.
good for you. Honestly, like, good for you for getting through that and getting
Yeah.
your confidence back, and then continuing with it, because
Yeah.
some people might not have continued
This is true.
after.
But you keep going. It's like that was then, this is now. You don't dwell
Yeah.
on it. You just move forward, acknowledge what
Yeah.
happened, learn from your mistake, and move forward. And then, I mean, I had, 40 years of really wonderful flying after that. I got to go on a little wave flight in Sugarbush, Vermont once, where I was looking down at the ski slopes, and it was really beautiful. And I've flown in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains in New Mexico, and in Slovenia, in the Slovenian Alps and the Italian Dolomites, and so I've had some really amazing experiences in flying, and it's just been wonderful.
It sounds like it. So I always try to make it my goal, like anywhere I travel, to go
Mhm.
fly.
Yeah.
And now, and usually, like, especially if I'm near the water, it's going to be in a
Hmm.
seaplane. But now I've
Oh.
started adding soaring to my list. So, like,
Hmm.
a friend of mine wants me to meet him in Colorado this year, and
Oh yeah.
definitely would like to go for a flight there. So,
Oh,
um,
absolutely. Absolutely.
I don't think I could handle, like, personally, I'm not sure how I feel about those wave flights at really high altitudes and
Yeah.
having to be on oxygen and stuff, but who knows? Maybe someday I'll get into that. I'm just a lowly helicopter pilot, so
Yeah, yeah, but most of the glider flights I've been on where I had to use oxygen, it's just a nasal cannula, so you just have that little tiny thing in your nose. You don't even
Mhm.
notice it after a few minutes, and it's
Okay.
just fine because I've been up soaring at 16,000 feet and
Yeah.
with the oxygen, and it's perfectly fine. So it's great.
That's really high for a helicopter pilot.
Well, when you're in Colorado, depending on where you are, you could be on the ground at 8,000 feet,
I know. I
So
know. I know. So
pushing
yeah,
gliders
we
around,
could
and
be
then you
safe.
do feel hypoxic, but
Yeah. Oh yeah,
yeah,
for sure. So
yeah.
anyway. Well, so what advice do you have to any young people or anybody of any age who
Hmm.
might be interested in gliding?
I would say go for it. Find a place where you can take a ride. In power, they call it a discovery flight, and you can do that in gliders too. There are glider
Hmm.
ports all over the US.
Hmm.
You can just go on to www.ssa.org, and they have a tab that says where to fly, and they'll pull up a map of all the glider ports, and you can find one that's close to you. It is the most affordable way to get into aviation,
Yeah.
bar none.
Yeah.
And especially if where you're going to take lessons as a club instead of a commercial operation, once you join the club, your expenses are next to nothing. I mean, you might
Yeah.
have to pay for your tow, which would be maybe $30 for a tow, and
Yeah.
that's it. Because the instructions are usually free, the aircraft are often free when you're in a club, or they're just a couple bucks an hour. I mean, they really keep it very affordable. And the thing that I love most about it is because soaring, it's a team sport because you need people to hook the plane up and run the wing and haul the plane back. And, it takes more than one person to actually you don't just get in and fly. You need a little bit of a support with that. People just form a community really, really quickly. And that sense of community you get I've never experienced it anywhere else. It is just so lovely to be with other people who also love to fly and who love soaring and want you to have as good a time as they have. When I took my very first lessons, I remember walking in the office afterwards, and a man was, my instructor said, "Here's Pat, she's a new student." And he goes, "Oh, how many hours do you have?" And I looked at my logbook and I said, 20 minutes. And he just said, "Congratulations." And he was effusive with his congratulations and telling me how wonderful it was. And it just made me feel so good. No one had ever been like that to me before. And that was just amazing. So
That's
I would
wonderful.
love to see more women doing it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it makes me really sad because there's kind of this knee jerk, "Oh, I couldn't do that" reaction that I get from women. The past couple of book launches I've been at, I've been trying to tell women, this is really great. You should try it. And they're like, "Oh no, I could never do that." And I know that's how I was when I first started. And it's like, you sure could. I was an
Yeah.
English major. If I could do it, you can do it.
In fact, you can do it and solo at 14 years old.
That's
So I
right.
know you can do it. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
and that's amazing for young people who are into
right.
aviation too, whose, your parents can very affordably
Yeah,
support that passion by
sure.
getting you into gliding. And for
Yep.
me, as somebody, I think we were on the call last night with one of our good friends and book club
Hmm.
members who has been a pilot for a very long time, who said she would never do something like this. I am a total convert. I wanted
Good.
to try it
Uh-huh.
just because I was curious and I kind of
Sure.
had this bucket list of
Hmm.
cool general aviation stuff I wanted to try. But
Hmm.
I absolutely love the way, and I had this sense about it before I even tried it, that glider pilots were like sailors because I grew
Hmm.
up sailing,
Hmm.
and that they had like a special magic, that they could read the air even better than somebody like me as a helicopter pilot who
Hmm.
was flying low along coastlines. I could
Hmm.
tell before we got to the side of a cliff or whatever
Hmm.
what was going to happen to the aircraft because I could look down at the water and I could see the
Right.
cat's
Hmm.
paws of
Hmm.
where the downdraft was coming. And I was like,
Hmm.
okay, let's slow down because we're going to be in turbulence here
Right.
in a
Right.
minute. So I had some
Hmm.
magical powers, but when you start gliding, you start reading the atmosphere in entirely different ways.
Hmm.
You view the birds in
Hmm.
entirely different ways. And you
Sure.
really captured that in your novel. And so
Thank
did
you.
Rebecca in hers.
Yeah.
And I forgot to mention one of our favorite characters in the book was Trevor. And tell us about Trevor and where that idea for that character came from. Nothing to do with gliding, but we just
Nothing
love
to do with
the
guy, but
character.
but it's aviation because he's a bird. He's a
Correct.
little parakeet. He's a little blue parakeet, and again, this accidentally happens to her. She has to take him as a pet because her downstairs neighbor who owned him was allergic to birds, and so she and Trevor become great buddies. And this is something I grew up with. I mean, when I was a kid, everybody had a parakeet in our neighborhood. So I wanted to have that in here. And he makes a lovely foil because when you have a character living alone, she can't really talk to herself. So
Right.
you need someone for her to interact with. So I have her interact with her downstairs neighbor, but then also on a day to day basis, she interacts with her little pet because parakeets are very vocal and they love to be talked to. They love to hear your voice and will imitate you. And so I have her talking to Trevor, and it goes beyond Pretty Bird, and she ends up really, really having little conversations with him, which is kind of a fun thing to do.
It was amazing. I think he was just this. You're right, a great foil
Hmm.
from a craft perspective, but also a bright spot in her
Yeah,
darkness.
right.
That she had on somebody to quote unquote to depend
Hmm.
on and to
Yeah,
communicate with. And I
yeah.
learned so much about parakeets because I had knew nothing about birds and
Yeah,
certainly didn't have an
yeah,
appreciation for them. And I
right.
just I found my own affection for him, so that was
Good.
really
I'm
lovely.
really
So thank
glad.
you.
And it also gives her someone to take care of. And
Right,
sometimes when you need taking care of, it's fun if it helps you if you can take care of someone else or something
that's right.
else. And
Yep,
that
so
also
good,
helps bring you along. So he worked on
so well
multiple
done.
levels. Yeah.
This
And
is
he's just
this
cute.
book is a beautiful book written by a writer who happens to also be an expert about flying and gliding, and we're very grateful for it. But this is not your only work. Tell
No,
us
it's not.
about yeah, tell us about your other stuff.
Well, I do have two other novels. They don't have aviation in them, but the one is called The Other Sister. Let me hold it up for you. And this is also about the Hungarian community. It's set in the same town as Ellen's town, but it starts many years before. So it's sort of a prequel to her society and her town. And it's about two sisters who are in love with the same man, and one comes to the United States and one stays behind. And then I follow their families for 3 years as the
Oh,
relationships
neat.
develop and people have kids and things happen. And so that's The Other Sister. And my newer one is Eve's Daughters, which is kind of a play on the Adam and Eve story. I have them living in a number of places, including New Jersey. And so it's two novellas that are like two short novels, and they have different characters, but they kind of don't. And they're where one begins, the other ends. So you could read them in either order if you wanted. It's kind of a strange, loopy, weird book. And I'm really glad I found a publisher who would take it, because it is such a strange book that a lot of publishers didn't know what to do with it. But these people were very open to it. They were great, Moonshine Cove in North Carolina, and they were really, really cool about it and said, hey, we'll go for it. And it's fun, and it's won an award, and it's made me very happy. So I'm
Oh, I
glad about
can't
that.
wait to read both of those. That's
Thanks.
wonderful.
And my newest book is back to aviation. This is, let me go that side, Where No Man Can Touch, which is a quote from a poem by Anne Morrow Lindbergh, who not only was married to a famous pilot, but was a pilot in her own right,
Mhm.
and also a poet and a beautiful writer. And so I liked this phrase because you can read on multiple levels. And
Yeah.
I took it from her poem. And the cover of this book is Faye Gillis Wells, who's one of the first women to have her life saved by a parachute. She actually had to bail out of an airplane, so she was the first woman to do that. And I heard her speak, oh gosh, back in the early 90s at a Women in Aviation conference.
Wow.
I'm thinking maybe one in Nevada. And she was on a panel with Chuck Yeager. And
Mhm.
she still had that grin and that twinkle in her eye, even though she was well into her 80s. And she was just so wonderful about having all the women be in the air. She was really terrific. And Yeager, I have to say, he was great. I mean, he was up there and he made a comment like, an airplane doesn't care what your genitals look like, go fly. He was,
Thanks,
he
Chuck.
was, he was real supportive, which was great, which I didn't
That is
expect from
good.
him, but that was cool. And so
That
I
is
was
good.
thinking about her, and like, no one knows who she is anymore, but she used to be really, really famous. And
Oh,
how many
wow.
other really famous women aviators were there that no one remembers anymore? And so
Yeah.
I started looking into that, and I just found all these women who did amazing flights when they were younger and back from long, long before the 20th century. I mean, really,
Yeah.
the very first woman aviator was in the 1700s,
Yeah.
and she flew a hot air balloon. And I thought that was just so cool. So I write about her, and I go all the way up to Jackie Cochran breaking the sound barrier. And
And when
that's
you
where I
say
cut
you
it off.
write about her, what do you mean by that in this book? Is this a history book? What is this?
Well, what I did was, it's all poetry.
Okay.
And
Right.
I love to write poetry, but one kind of poetry I really enjoy is called a persona poem, where you write as though you're someone else.
Uh-huh.
So it's like you're kind of channeling who they are and what they might have been thinking. So for each of these women, I tried to think about who she was at a particular point in her flying career and what was it like for her. And then I tried to write in her voice. And just because I'm a little bit nuts, I also wrote most of them in form, which means most of them have rhyme and a rhythm and regular stanzas. And what some people consider old fashioned, but it's actually having a resurgence in popularity. So writing formal poetry is coming back again, which is great. So I have all these crazy poems about all these women who did amazing, amazing things. So it's
Do
really
you,
fun.
I'm going to put you on the spot here. Do you have a favorite that you would be willing to read
I
for
don't
us?
have a favorite. Of course, I love all my darlings, right? But why don't I read the first one I wrote, which was about Bessie Coleman,
Yes.
um, who was the first African American woman to fly, to get her license. And no one in this country would teach her because she was black. And it
Mhm.
just, I shouldn't say this, but I was in the middle of a poetry conference, another panel discussion, and it was really boring. And I started doodling on the page, and all of a sudden it was almost like she was talking to me.
Oh,
And so
neat.
that's when I started writing it in her, what I would think is her voice. And I hope it's not being presumptuous to do that, but she's one of my heroines. I have her on a t-shirt, and she's
Mm.
just amazing. So on the 15th of June, 1921, she got her license. I call this plans. I guess you need to know she was from Waxahachie, Texas.
Right.
White men in Waxahachie plain won't teach me, nor any men north or south. Being female and black, they say, I can't learn such things. But my full-lipped mouth loves aileron, chandelle, empennage. So while I file the flapper's smoke-stained nails, I practice aerodrome and fuselage and save my tips. One day I'll do a tail slide overseas and split S slow roll where la vie est belle, instructors colorblind. Then, when I've joined those masters of the air, I'll glide beneath the cloud base unconfined, make my way back home, barnstorm the sky, and watch the white folk pay to see me fly.
I think I've heard you read that once before.
Oh,
I love it. It
thank you.
just really captures her inspiring spirit.
I
And
hope
I
so.
love I love the last line.
Thank you.
And I don't think it's presumptuous. I think you were very artful in using her voice, and you're not the only one who has done that. Carol
Yeah.
Hobson has done it in a full length novel, and
Hmm.
it is beautifully done. And we're forever grateful to her and to
Yeah.
you for just
Thank you.
keeping her story and her spirit alive so
Hmm.
that she can continue inspiring everyone, not just women.
That one kind of gives me chills because I wrote it almost like that. I didn't have to change it much at all, which just does not normally happen when you write poetry. It's usually a real struggle to get it on the page. But I just felt like she was just communicating with me, and it was just amazing. So
It really comes through. Yeah.
yeah, so all the poems are sort of along that line where they're just all
Well, congratulations on the reprinting of this book, because this is a book that has been out before and now it's coming back. And so where can we find all your books and you?
you certainly can find them on Amazon. Where No Man Can Touch is also available from Wind Canyon Books, who published Crosswind.
Okay.
So you can do that. Some of them are also available on Kindle. Eve's Daughters and the Other Sister are Kindle as well. Bookstore has them, and
And how about you? Where do we find you?
I live in Chrisfield, Maryland, which is in the middle of nowhere. I do have a website, www.patvaldata.com.
Well, Pat, I want to talk more with you in depth about writing and your writing journey and all that stuff and publishing. Was there anything else you had for us just about the book and about gliding that you wanted to share with anybody?
Okay, so if you'd like to hear some poems from Where No Man Can Touch, I'll be reading at the Writers Center in Bethesda, Maryland on September 9th, 2 p.m., along with another wonderful poet named Shirley Brewer. And her new book has come out. It's called Wild Girls. And we thought, boy, did they go together. So we're going to be reading from our two books.
That's so exciting. Okay, will that be available virtually too?
I don't think so. I think that's an
Okay.
in-person only. I don't know if they're also recording, but I will find out. That's a good question.
Okay. Well, that's great. Well, Pat, thank you so much for this book. And thanks for your time talking to me. And we're going to move into talking about writing and publishing. But I really appreciate your support of the Aviatrix Book Club and the work that you've given us.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for having us because I wish I had known about you a couple of years ago. I think all the books I've missed reading I have to catch up on now, which will be fun.
You have a lot to catch up on.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks so much for listening. I'd like to thank Shasta Ways and Michael Wilds of the Women's Soar Group for their help in producing this interview. The Women's Soar Group is a media company that gives women a platform to express themselves. Please join us next month in the Aviatrix Book Club when we'll discuss the book Fly Girls Revolt by Eileen Bjorkman. Blue skies and happy reading.